Yay. I brought the book that we use in the book reading class that I teach. I'm not sure that I'll use it, but the book reading we were going through this morning, or the section we were going through, I couldn't believe how much it echoed not only some of the things that I'm planning to talk about today, but even elements of the last two times I've talked. I kept going, it's like, I get this. This must be something for me to get too, because I seem to be echoing it. But before we go into that space, I'd like us to just take a moment and breathe and come fully present with our thinking into this moment. When we do that, when we come together in our thinking, when I come into my own thinking so that I know everything that is happening in this moment, and I have discarded things that happened 10 minutes ago and not concerned about things 30 minutes from now. I am just simply being. It's one of the best things that any of us ever does for ourselves, is to own this one moment that we have in this now. And so I embrace this moment, knowing that all of the things that happen in this service, both in this talk, in the remarks from Reverend Valerie, and in words that happen later, all of the messages resonate in the right and perfect way for every person who's hearing, whether they're in the room or they're across the way. This is a divine moment, and I simply allow it to manifest. And what I know for sure is that thing that wants to be said is said. That which wants to be heard is heard. And I know that right action flows from all of those gems and nuggets that move through my own thinking by means of me. And I say this both for myself, for everyone within the sound of my voice, and beyond. So in knowing that, there's so much else going on, but that's what's important in this moment. And so, in deep gratitude, I allow it to be, and I simply say, and so it is. So what I had been thinking about, talking about today, at first it was just a bit of an idea. And the interesting, actually I've thought about it for other talks is the thing, so the idea may have begun some time ago. But do you know how sometimes you have a thought and stuff happens, and then you have that thought, not exactly the same, but it surfaces in another way. And so in this case, it was surfaced again in a third way, maybe even a fourth way. So I'm thinking, okay, this is what I'm going to do. And I've titled it, The Value of Curiosity. Now, one of the early plants of this idea actually happened as I watched Masterpiece Theater. I don't know how many of you have watched it over the years, but since the time of Downton Abbey, there has been a sponsor for Masterpiece Theater, Viking Cruise Lines. And they do a magnificent video in the early part of Masterpiece Theater, and they play through that. And they say nice things, but there's one thing that really caught my attention every time. It's that the founder of Viking is talking, and he talks about his family. And he said, my family embodied a number of values: kindness, honesty, hard work. And he said, and I've added a fourth: be curious. And he said it in such a way, and it was so beautifully done, that as I said, I always took note of it. And then my granddaughter was born. She's now about 16 months old. So we have been through a number of months when I'm around her where I play with her to some extent, but to a certain extent, I'm just down on the floor with her and I'm watching what she does. And if a moment comes up, I do something and I respond to her, but I watch her. And the thing that you notice about children, very young children especially, is that they are curious. And you realize this seems to be just this innate drive to trying to find out more of this. Like you pick up a block, for heaven's sakes, is what she does. And she looks at it, and she looks at it at all different sides, and she thinks about it, and she puts it in both hands. And it's all of this kind of stimulation that seems to come from that urge of being curious. So that's one reason, parenthetically, that when I play with her, I allow her to decide, does she want to play with this toy or that toy? I just sit back and let it happen. And she goes from one thing to the other with such energy, and she will do this for a long time, especially if somebody is with her. She likes that part of it. But it's a curiosity thing. She feels safe. She feels whatever she needs to feel to be able to do that. So that's a recent stimulus. And some of you may have watched Ted Lasso when it was on TV. It's actually on Apple Plus TV. I did. And it's a delightful series. But there is one segment in there that I remember. And it had to do with curiosity as well. So fast forward with all of that, and within the last few weeks, I ran into the Walt Whitman quote that said, "Be curious, not judgmental." And so I think that is what cemented my own desire to look into this. Curiosity is something I think you all innately understand. I mean, you've seen it, you've had it yourself, and you explore. You probably, if you think about it long enough, can imagine that it's been studied almost in a mind-boggling way, because social scientists and psychologists do these things. They set up experiments to discover things. Mostly what we know about, maybe we read in articles or people make reference to, is more or less the results of some of those studies and how many different kinds of curiosity there are, as the way they put it. And so there's intellectual curiosity, and most of that comes from something that stimulates you to think that. And then there's similar to that is the kind of curiosity that makes you wonder, why did something happen? And those are things more or less outside of yourself that stimulates you to do, like even if it's as simple as, oh, I saw this, this strange thing in the sky, or I saw a car wreck and I wonder what happened, those kinds of things. So you may explore and find that. And that's not the curiosity I'm particularly interested in. So there's this intellectual curiosity, and then there's the moral aspect, and that's the term that the social scientists use to describe that, or psychologists. And that's what the man on Masterpiece Theater was referencing. And that's what got my attention, and I didn't realize that. There were 3 values, he said, my family had, and I added the 4th, be curious. And I think that appeal to something almost innate that we are striving to do, and it was just the idea of it. And of course, I've observed it in my granddaughter, and quite frankly, if it weren't for people observing animals doing things, I mean, that whole cat channel on YouTube, if there is one, wouldn't have any content, because we like watching animals be curious. We like seeing those things that animals do. And indeed, they have been studied and do believe that it really is innate, especially in the apes And then, of course, rats are something that is also widely studied. They have curiosity, and the scientists who are using them in various things rather depend on that idea of curiosity. And so I began to think of it, and what came up in the parable this morning is some of the same ideas, that there needs to be curiosity about what's going on with us, to the point that we can do something that with all of those thinkings. If one of the things we talk about in Science of Mind, we say change your thinking and change your life. And what we also know, those of us who worked at changing things, recognize that's a much simpler thing to say than to actually do. And we also have taught, and I've spoken from this space as well as others, about when something happens in your life, especially something big, and especially all of those things that you go, wait a minute, what is going on here? And so the tendency that we often have is to blame external circumstances for what happens. And if we understand the teaching of Science of Mind, and Ernest Holmes says that once we understand the awareness of who we really are, once we understand the idea that consciousness, everything is within me, that power is within me, then that is when we are liberated. He even says at some point in the Science of Mind that this freedom of choice that we have is both freedom and bondage. And it's freedom because you get to choose. See, in the next moment, in the next 3 moments, we're making choices all the time. That part of it is kind of mind-boggling, that all the time, every moment. And the bondage comes, it's because we're thinking all the time, and we're the ones who are driving that. And so our minds get tired to a certain extent. We fall back on things we already know. And one of the things we already know are the judgments we make about things. And we've made them in such a way that if I ask everyone, share with me a judgment you've made, you might struggle with figuring that out. As one psychologist I read a number of years said, they call it unconscious for a reason. We don't know what we're thinking sometimes. Carl Jung famously talked about defense mechanisms and things that we knee-jerk do in defense. Denial is one that's quite well known. And we do that because we literally are not able to accept that what is happening is really our fault, or that we have any control over that. I mean, you made me angry is not an uncommon thing to say or to think. He made me feel shame. It's not an uncommon thing to think, because this person did do all of these things, and the person that was speaking to you did do the anger-producing things. You reacted, but it's not your fault. And so the idea that there is a different way is something we talk about a lot, and in many avenues. Another one of the defense mechanisms that I actually see from time to time, and when I see it, it's not that I'm going, oh, you're doing this, because that is not how anyone ever learns, is somebody telling somebody that this is what you're doing that's not appropriate. But one of the things I actually see is one that Jung called projection, where whatever is happening within me, I actually accuse you of doing that thing. And it happens. It happens quite a lot. And and of course, we're not aware that that's what we're doing. Because we wouldn't do it necessarily if we were aware that, oh, that's my problem, but I'm going to make it your problem. I don't think we consciously ever do that. That's why they're called unconscious. So there's a lot within us, all of us, that could take a look at. So how do we decide? Well, I think there needs to be some sort of an awakening, if you will, when something happens, regardless of what we think in the immediate moment, but to take back time and step back and go, what was happening at that time? What was going on? And then spend time with it. Don't try to even answer the question as much as sit with that. Because there is a power within you that knows. And so if you come to understand it, it may help. But the other thing that Ernest Holmes says, and the man who writes Learn to Live also said in this parable, is that you treat for love, life, wisdom, understanding, and know and believe that those things that you are knowing in a solid way manifest in your consciousness, in your subconscious, to the point that whatever needs to be erased gets erased. In the Pearl of Great Price, which is the parable we were reading today, it's really a story of someone who had something of value, and he found something of value, and he covered it up till he could claim it and claim what it is. He could get enough goods to be able to buy it, acquire it, whatever it is. And so one of the stories that he opens with in this book is one that may be familiar to you all. You may have read it somewhere because I've heard it a lot. There was a man a farmer in Pennsylvania, who was not getting the crops that he wanted. He was not feeling successful as a farmer. So he decided to sell his property and to move to Ontario, where he thought it was going to be better there. The person who bought his property was out tending his cows, and he was out in the fields doing what you do, and he noticed this slick, shiny place in his ground. Well, the short version is that is when oil was discovered in Pennsylvania. And the pearl of great price was there for the original owner to find, but didn't, and it was there for the new person to find. And so that is the crux of the story. And then he goes on to say that in order to buy, if you will, in your spiritual coin, to buy what it is that you want, which may be wisdom and understanding and love. Anything you feel is missing, you must be willing to sell what you're holding in that place. That is your spiritual coin. And he is very candid when he says that it is not a simple task, that sometimes it takes time, but persistence is what pays off. You keep coming back to the truth, but you have to believe in that truth. You have to put that coin of your spiritual money container in that basket. He believes he's very frank, I think, in all of the parables. I have the class today, we all talked about the idea of how things happen and they keep happening to us because we're not knowing. And he says one has to sell his false knowledge in order to have enough psychic money to buy the good knowledge. And so what is the knowledge that we need to sell? We have to sell the idea that it's not my fault, that I take responsibility for this life. And when I can completely sell that idea and take responsibility for my own life fully and completely, I personally think that in my experience, I have to do it pretty much every day. It has to be part. And, I still don't necessarily get everything right, but I make progress and I move forward. And so it is the thing that we are required to do. So anytime anything is happening in your life, that is something to consider. What is it that wants to change? Because I think that things happen like that to get our attention. And so once it gets our attention, the question is, what am I going to do with it? Do I just deny it? Do I just pretend like it's somebody else? Or do I own what, because it's in my experience, that it is my issue? I had a situation a long time ago when I actually, I did something and I made a mistake, and it caused someone else to be overlooked in a particular set of circumstances that I won't go into. And when that happened, I felt terrible, because I felt like it was my fault. I truly did, and I apologized, and I apologized, and I apologized. And then the person who was standing in front of me, she said, "Oh, it happens to me all the time. I'm short and I get overlooked." Whew. It shudders me to this day to think about that. And of course, it doesn't take me off the hook to be more careful with my paperwork. But this could have happened, and she goes, no big problem. But that's not what happened. So when I go back to this idea, be curious and not judgmental, see what Walt Whitman said is that when we move into judgment, what we're doing is absolutely blocking wisdom and understanding. And instead, we should be curious and not judgmental. So when something happens, simply as opposed to delving into all of the reasons and soul searching, just not respond emotionally. And one of the things that was said in that book even, that if you cannot react that way, the energy that you save will be quite impressive. And so that we invest in our own idea, it's just a tool, curiosity in this case, to be curious instead of judging. So somebody says something about you, or somebody does something that seems to affect you, be curious, not judgmental. When the external events are making you crazy, you feel like that everything is going to hell in a handbasket, when there seems to be tragic circumstances, when they're even floating around in my own mind, be curious and not judgmental. In that Ted Lasso episode, and if you watch Ted Lasso, then you may or may not remember it, because it was one scene that he did. But if you have watched it and you understand the show, you can find that on video, because he quotes Walt Whitman in that vignette that is done. And he talks about being curious and asking questions. And he is saying to those people around him who were surprised at what he was able to accomplish, and he reminds them that they asked him this, but they didn't ask him that. And they never asked him, had he ever done this activity before? He said, I would have said yes. But they didn't ask him. Be curious and not judgmental. And it was a great vignette in Ted Lasso. There were a number of really nice moments, but that was one. And so it's the same really with all of us. When you're making yourself crazy with worry or concern, when it is something within you feels disturbed, you just don't know the answer, you've run out of money, there are things that are bothersome, be curious and not judgmental. That is what Walt Whitman said. And so Ernest Holmes doesn't address curiosity, but he talks about inquiry. And he is saying that when we inquire and we learn more about things, we embody those things into our own lives. And as we take the opportunities to not react, give ourselves that pause to respond, we are giving ourselves the space to simply be curious instead of judgmental. And it seems to me that put in that context, it is such a simple thing to do. And so I invite all of us to just remember Walt Whitman's phrase, be curious, not judgmental. I'm wanting to bring it into my own life as well. I thank you for being here, and I am really glad to be able to share a number of things that I know can make my life better, so I'm going to assume that it applies to everyone. So I will simply say, and so it is. Thank you. You want to do the offering? Are you ready? There we go. Divine love consecrates my gift. It goes forth to heal, to bless, and to prosper. And it prospers all those who give and all those who receive. I rejoice in the sharing of my good, and I release my gift with love. And so it is. And so Ruthie's going to take the offering plate around. And this is the time when we often ask if anyone has questions or you have any things that you would like to share, maybe an experience that you've had in this area. And if not, and people even online have asked questions as well, so I invite them all. We can participate. But if not, if there's no one that has done it online, then let us know that as we come together, that good always comes.
Catherine, we do have a comment from online I wanted to share.
Okay.
Kate, last week, Kate asked Reverend Mary to do a prayer treatment for her with regards to her oral surgery, and she woke up the next day and all of her pain was gone, and she is so grateful.
And I've heard those things as well. And another word that is often used in a situation like that, when something is really awful and struggling, surrendering to the power and presence within. You do it. I have heard a number of people who've just given that up and decided that it's beyond me. Thank you. Anyone else? The microphone is standing by if you choose to talk. Okay, no pressure at all. And so, thus ends our service today. I'm so glad you all were here. And if you have any other comments you might want to do privately, then we'll be back there. Thank you for being here, and Happy New Year.